2 years since the arrival of the pure evil, that is COVID-19, delivered to the world, by the way, by the communist Chinese regime. Here, at least, there feels a little bit of reason to hope that all of those divisive corona politics might be in our past. Unfortunately, that's not the case in other so-called liberal democracies, buckling under the hatefulness of vaccine division advanced by leaders such as Justin Trudeau and Jacinda Ardern. They've attempted to demonise the inspirational freedom convoys, which first won many millions of hearts in Canada and are now spreading across the globe. But what they've tried to do is describe these beautiful people as swastika-waving, far-right, anti-vax extremists. What rubbish. From Israel to Brussels, where a blockade has delivered a Valentine's gift that will make the EU sit up and pay attention, that's not what we're seeing on the ground. Over the weekend, peaceful protests descended on the Austrian capital of Vienna, despite the government having banned the protests, while in Paris, police used violent measures to disperse the crowds of demonstrators. And rather than opening a dialogue with peaceful protesters in my native New Zealand, the snaring Ardern had the police forcibly and violently remove them in scenes you would expect from Russia or China. As I say in a new column for the Mail Online today, Joe Biden, Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, Jacinda Ardern in particular have been exposed as the real COVID extremists, tearing their societies apart with divisive mandates and draconian restrictions no longer backed up by scientific evidence. It is hard to believe the need to say it in 2022, but any leader who truly believes segregation is a way to advance society needs their head read. But breaking tonight, Trudeau has gone even further by invoking emergency powers to quell Canada's COVID protests, effectively allowing the Canadian government to declare the Ottawa protest illegal and clear it out by force if necessary. Neil Oliver, they're panicking. And they're panicking because I think they know this is a popular movement spreading across the globe. And these are not extreme people, Neil. These are good people on the whole.
Yeah, you mentioned, Dan, Trudeau invoking or going to invoke emergency powers, and it's so extraordinary, it's so ironic in a way that his own father was the last person in Canada to do anything remotely similar. In an earlier, iteration of the emergency powers, the War Measures Act, and he invoked it in the face of the October crisis, so-called in 1970, when a group of independence-seeking terrorists trying to set up a socialist independent state in Quebec had kidnapped politicians. And as that drama unfolded, Trudeau Sr. invoked these War Measures Act. And the irony that his son is doing something similar in the face of peaceful protesters who are putting up bouncy castles and offering saunas and free food to families who are gathered to ask for freedom. It just seems, I think we live in a topsy-turvy world at the moment. And I think Justin Trudeau, you mentioned Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, obviously Emmanuel Macron in France. I think it's not about health now, it's about saving face.
Yes.
I think they're the sort of people who are not inclined to tolerate dissent, as it turns out. And they're getting increasingly desperate in their tone, in their language, even in their body language and in their facial expressions. The way I say topsy-turvy, here we are being encouraged to look desperately at Putin's Russia and Ukraine and NATO, and everyone familiar with history, ancient and modern, recognises the posturing of both sides. But in the past, we in the West, we were encouraged to regard ourselves as the good guys, the defenders of liberty and freedom, standing up to the bully. But in this upside down through the looking glass world, you've got Trudeau, you've got Macron, you've got Ardern, and they are the bullies.
Yeah,
they are the bullies, and they are the ones trying to force some kind of totalitarianism onto their freedom-loving ordinary working people. It's a desperation to be obeyed, a desperation to be taken seriously. And, well, the mask has fallen. And people that, you would have expected under other circumstances to be champions of liberty and freedom are showing themselves to be anything but.
Well, I think you're completely right on all of that, Neil. And remember, this is something they've boasted about. They have boasted about the creation of a two-tier society. This is something they are proud of, bizarrely. But I think where their argument is failing, Neil, is that they are trying to present these freedom convoys as something they are not. And we can now, thanks to the beauty of the internet and the beauty of social media, and I know, by the way, very often we slag off the internet and slag off social media because, my God, it has brought some ills to society. But one of the real positive things, Neil, is we're watching this all unfold in real time. And it doesn't matter what Jacinda Ardern says about these folk. It doesn't matter what the mainstream media says about these folk, because we can see what they're doing and we know what they're doing, and we know they are not far-right swastika-waving extremists as Trudeau and Ardern are trying to present them as.
No, it's unbelievable. I mean, people have taken their children. And it's families that have turned up in support of these protests, and in these viral times, it turns out that freedom is airborne as well, and it's spreading. I think inspired by the Canadian example, that's what you're seeing taking root like a windblown seed in France. Possibly going to moving on from Paris to Brussels. The protesters camped outside Parliament House in Canberra. The protests that you were showing there in New Zealand, the haka. I mean, how anyone can watch and listen to the haka as a determined declaration of freedom. I mean, it puts the hairs up in the back of my neck every time I see it, and I can't help but wish that I had a haka of my own to contribute to it. And yes, the mischaracterization of people who just want the freedom to go to the cinema with their children, who just want to be able to go out to the restaurant as families. The idea that the leaders of those countries, those Western liberal democratic countries, would seek to demonize and characterize those people as fascists, as racists, as misogynists, as far-right extremists, it's becoming more and more ridiculous. And I cannot help but think that the seeds that have been planted in Canada, in Europe and elsewhere will flower. I don't see it being turned back now, and it remains to be seen, I suppose, just how far someone like Justin Trudeau will push it. But I don't see any good destination for him at the moment unless he finally finds it within himself to acknowledge that he is in the wrong.
Well, Neil Oliver, we will see. We will see. Time will tell. I think the important thing is that the world is watching. And if they try and dismantle these protests with unnecessary force, then we will see it all. Neil Oliver.
Yes, if I can just, you're absolutely right. That one of the other ironies is that the internet has made it possible for those with a view to totalitarianism to get some of this in train, with centralized currencies or whatever else might be planned. But ironically, it is, as you say, it's the fact that we can see with our own eyes what is happening and who the protesters are in places like Ottawa and in Canberra. We can see the nature of them, and we can decide for ourselves whether or not these are extremists or freedom-loving families, and that truth is out there and will not be disguised.
Neil Oliver, thank you so much.